The morning began with a quiet stillness that wrapped the lake like a blanket. The water lay smooth as glass and only the occasional bird cut across the surface, leaving trails that disappeared quickly. The man stood at the end of his dock, his hands resting loosely on the weathered wood as he looked at his boat tied gently to the post. The boat rocked slightly with the movement of the water, its reflection sharp and perfect on the calm surface. For him, this place was more than property. It was a sanctuary. The boat was not just for fishing or for leisure. It was his escape, his freedom, a symbol of his right to live peacefully in the home he had chosen. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air. He could almost forget the constant chatter of the neighborhood, the endless rules, the feeling that someone was always watching. Out here on the dock there was only him, the boat, and the lake that seemed to stretch endlessly under the sky. The sound of the water, lapping softly against the wooden posts, was like a slow rhythm, steady and comforting. But just as he let his eyes close, enjoying the moment, a harsh sound broke through. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel behind him, followed by a loud knock against the dock railing. It was not the knock of a friendly neighbor, but the sharp, angry sound of fists demanding attention. He opened his eyes slowly, turning his head just enough to see 3 figures approaching. They were dressed in their usual HOA fashion, pressed shirts, stiff expressions, and clipboards in hand, as if the papers they carried were weapons of authority. Their presence did not surprise him. He had felt this was coming. The tall man in the front raised a sheet of paper in his hand like a banner. His voice cut through the morning air. "This is official notice," he declared. "You are ordered to remove your boat within 7 days." His words were heavy, meant to sound final and absolute. The neighbors had already begun to gather at the edges of their lawns, drawn to the sound of authority and conflict. Whispers carried across the water. The man did not move from his place at the edge of the dock. He simply studied the group with calm eyes. The shorter woman stepped forward, her lips pressed into a firm line as she shoved the paper closer to his chest. "This boat creates ripples that disturb the lake view," she said in a sharp tone. "Neighbors have complained. It is against HOA rules to obstruct the natural appearance of the lakefront. Remove it or face fines." Her voice was loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear, ensuring the humiliation was public. Still, the man did not flinch. He reached out slowly, his hand steady as he took the paper. He glanced at it for only a second, then folded it once and tucked it into his shirt pocket as if it were nothing more than a receipt for groceries. The crowd leaned in closer, waiting for him to argue, to explode, to demand his rights, but he only gave them a small smile. It was not a warm smile, not one born from kindness or happiness. It was the kind of smile that carried weight, a smile that seemed to hide something beneath it, something no one else could see. The tall HOA member frowned deeply at the expression, his jaw tightening. "Do not take this lightly," he warned. "Failure to comply will result in penalties and possible removal of your boat by force. We will not allow anyone to disrespect community standards." His words carried authority, but his tone carried irritation. He was used to people breaking down under his threats, apologizing, begging for extensions. But the man only nodded, slow and calm, his gaze drifting back to the water as though he was more interested in the reflection of the sky than the angry voices behind him. His silence was worse than defiance. Silence created unease. It was a weapon sharper than anger. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some crossed their arms. Others whispered quietly. No one could understand why he did not argue, why he seemed almost amused by the entire scene. Karen, the loudest of the group, could no longer stand it. She stepped forward, her heels clacking hard against the wood of the dock as she pointed her finger at him. "You think this is a game?" she shouted. "You think your smile changes the fact that you are breaking the rules? Rules are rules, and no one is above them. Especially not you." Her face flushed red with anger as she spoke, the veins in her neck visible. But the man did not respond. He only tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words. Then he turned back to his boat, his hand brushing gently across the wooden edge as though her voice did not matter. The neighbors waited for a storm, waited for him to snap back, but the storm never came. Instead he leaned down, untying the rope from the post and letting the boat drift just a little. The morning light caught the surface, sending a golden shimmer across the water. It was as though he was more in conversation with the lake than with the people shouting at him. Karen's mouth opened again, but the tall man placed a hand on her shoulder. Enough, he muttered. Let's go. We have given him notice. He knows the consequences. They turned sharply, their shoes clapping against the dock as they walked away. The crowd slowly dispersed, though their whispers carried long after. Some shook their heads. Others looked nervous. None of them could explain that smile. The man remained where he was, hands resting on the dock, eyes calm as the boat floated gently beside him. The paper rested in his pocket, heavy not because of what it said, but because of what it meant, and though no one else knew it, he carried a truth deeper than any rule, a truth that made the notice in his pocket nothing more than an empty threat. He whispered something softly under his breath, words carried away by the wind, his eyes reflecting the wide stretch of the lake, a lake that belonged more to him than anyone dared to imagine. His smile widened just a little, and in that quiet moment, he looked less like a man being ordered and more like a man watching a play unfold, a play in which he alone knew the ending. The next evening, the community hall lights glowed bright against the dark sky, and the smell of freshly polished wood filled the air as the man stepped inside. The chairs were already lined up in rows. Neighbors sat with folded arms and expectant faces, their whispers echoing through the room. At the front sat the HOA board, Karen in the middle with her sharp eyes and stiff posture. The tall man who had handed him the notice sat on her right, and the shorter woman with the tight voice on her left. Papers were spread across the table as if they were preparing for a trial rather than a meeting. The man walked slowly to the back, choosing a chair in the corner. He sat down without a word, his presence alone enough to make heads turn. Karen cleared her throat loudly, calling the meeting to order. Tonight we address an issue that threatens the beauty and value of our lakefront community, she declared, her voice shrill and heavy with authority. The whispers in the room died down, every eye fixed on her. She tapped the papers in front of her and held up a copy of the notice. This concerns the boat docked behind lot 27, she said, her gaze cutting toward the man in the corner. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward as if waiting for drama to unfold. Karen slammed the paper down on the table. Neighbors have complained that the boat creates noise, blocks the natural view of the lake, and may even attract unwanted outsiders. She went on, her words sharp like knives. We cannot allow one man to put his personal interests above the rules we all agreed to follow. The shorter woman nodded quickly, adding, it's not just about the view. There are safety concerns too. Children play near the water. If everyone kept a boat tied, there would be chaos. Rules are rules, and we must all obey them. The tall man leaned forward, his hands folded tightly. We have given notice. We expect compliance. If he refuses, we will fine him, and if necessary, remove the boat ourselves. Gasps moved through the crowd at his last words. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, but others frowned uneasily. The man remained silent, his face calm, his eyes almost amused as he listened. His silence began to work against the board. It filled the room with a strange tension. Karen could not bear it. She slammed her hand on the table. Speak, she demanded. You sit there with that same smile as if this means nothing to you? Don't you understand that your actions affect everyone? You are breaking the very harmony of this place. The neighbors turned their heads toward him, waiting for his reply. The air was thick with expectation, but he only leaned back in his chair, his arms folding slowly across his chest. His voice finally broke the silence. Soft but clear, I hear your complaints. His words carried no fear, no apology, only calm. The quiet tone made the room even more restless. Karen's face flushed. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, he continued. You speak as if this boat is a crime, as if its presence destroys your peace. Yet none of you ask why I keep it there. None of you consider that rules are not always stronger than truth. His words were simple, but they landed heavy. The neighbors whispered again, some exchanging nervous glances. Karen slammed her fist again. Don't try to twist this. The HOA decides what rules mean. Not you. You either obey or you face the consequences. Her voice cracked slightly, frustration bleeding into her control. The man did not argue. He only nodded once and leaned back, his calm expression unnerving those who watched. The tall man quickly moved to regain control. We are not here to debate philosophy, he said firmly. We are here to enforce order. The boat must be gone. If not, we escalate. That is final. The meeting ended in an uneasy silence. The board members gathered their papers and stormed out. Karen shot one last glare at the man, but he did not move. He simply sat there as if carved from stone. The neighbors slowly filed out, whispering louder now, some whispering that he was arrogant, others whispering that he was brave. But no one left without feeling unsettled, because deep down every person in that room felt the same strange thing, that the man was not worried, that he knew something they didn't, something that made the rules and threats of the HOA seem smaller than they imagined. And though they could not understand it, they could feel it, and it left them restless long after the lights in the hall were switched off. The night after the meeting, the lakefront felt different. The man stood on his dock again, but this time the calm air carried whispers from the houses above. Lights flickered through curtains as neighbors peered out. His boat swayed gently as always, yet the air was no longer quiet. Rumors had begun to spread like smoke. People said the HOA was planning to fine him heavily. Others whispered that the board would tow the boat away in secret. Children playing near the water pointed toward his dock, their parents quickly pulling them back as if his presence alone carried trouble. By morning, flyers appeared on doors. Bold words printed across cheap paper: "Protect our lakefront," "Remove the boat," signatures at the bottom. From the HOA members gave it weight. The man walked past them calmly as neighbors pulled the papers off their doors, some frowning, some nodding in silent agreement. Karen was seen walking door to door with her clipboard, her voice sharp, warning people that if they did not support the board, they too might face penalties. Her words were full of fire. Yet deep down she was scared, because the man's silence still haunted her. He did not react. He did not argue, and that calm smile made her feel like she was pushing against a wall she could not break. That night the man sat by his window, the moonlight pouring across the lake, and he noticed movement, shadows shifting near the dock. Two figures crept along the shoreline, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They whispered to each other in hurried tones, pointing at the boat as though measuring it, planning. His eyes narrowed, but he made no sound. He simply watched. Their footsteps crunched on the gravel. Their lights danced across the water, but when they turned toward the house, they saw him sitting there, motionless in his chair, his face half in shadow, his eyes fixed on them. The figures froze for a moment, the weight of his stare making them stumble back. They quickly hurried away into the dark, the sound of their feet fading fast. The man leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. He knew they would be back. The HOA was desperate to break him, desperate to prove their power, and desperation made people reckless. The next morning, more neighbors avoided his eyes. Whispers grew louder. Some said the man was arrogant. Others said he was planning something. Karen gathered a group in the park. Her voice carried sharp and loud. "If we allow this man to ignore the rules, what will stop the rest of us from losing our community?" she cried. Her words fired the crowd into a nervous energy. Some nodded, some clapped, but even as she shouted, she could see doubt in their eyes. Because the one person they wanted to break did not bend. He did not fight back. He only smiled as if he already knew the ending. The pressure rose each day, and yet the man moved through the neighborhood calm and steady, his boat tied as always, his dock still strong, his silence heavier than any words, and the HOA members could feel it, like a storm building quietly on the horizon, unseen but impossible to ignore. Days passed, but the pressure from the HOA only grew stronger. The man could feel their eyes on him every time he walked past the houses. Neighbors no longer greeted him. Some even closed their doors when he passed. Rumors spread that the HOA was preparing its final strike. One morning, as he stepped onto his dock with a cup of coffee in his hand, he noticed an envelope taped to his door in bold red letters. "Final warning." He pulled it free and opened it slowly. The words inside were filled with threats. "Remove your boat within 48 hours or the HOA will take direct action. Penalties will increase daily. Removal fees will be charged. Legal measures will be pursued." The letter tried to sound powerful, but as he read it, his lips curved into that same calm smile, the same one that made them so uneasy. Later that evening, Karen appeared at his front steps. Not alone this time, but with half a dozen neighbors standing behind her, their arms crossed and faces tight with curiosity and fear. She waved the red letter in her hand and shouted so all could hear, "You think this is a joke? You think we will back down? Rules are rules, and you are not above them. Remove that boat or we will remove it for you." Her voice echoed across the lake. The neighbors shifted, waiting for him to fight back, waiting for him to defend himself. But instead he stepped onto the porch, his face calm, his eyes steady. He looked at Karen for a long moment and then glanced at the crowd behind her. His voice was low but clear enough that every person could hear. You keep shouting about rules, you keep waving your papers, but you do not understand who truly controls this lake. His words hung heavy in the air. Karen blinked in confusion, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. The neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, "What does he mean?" The tall man from the board stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Don't play games with us. The HOA decides what is allowed here. Not you." The man's smile deepened slightly, his silence stretching longer than they could bear. Then finally he spoke again. "You are wrong." His tone was soft, but the certainty in it made Karen's stomach twist. He turned slowly, walking toward the dock as the crowd followed, his boots thudding against the wood. The boat swayed gently as if waiting. He placed his hand on the post and looked back at them. "Your warnings mean nothing, because the water you stand beside does not belong to your board." His words made the neighbors murmur louder. Karen's face burned red with anger. She shouted back, "Enough of your riddles. Either obey or suffer the consequences." The man tilted his head, slightly as if amused. "I think it is you who will soon understand consequences." His eyes drifted across the lake, the wide endless stretch of water glowing gold with the setting sun. His calmness unsettled them more than threats ever could. The neighbors could feel it now. The balance was shifting, and though the HOA shouted louder, their voices seemed weaker compared to the weight of his silence and the mystery of his words. Karen clutched the paper in her hands so tightly it crumpled. Her fury boiling but her heart pounding with doubt, because for the first time she realized she might be fighting a man who held far more power than she dared to imagine. The next morning the neighborhood buzzed with tension. People whispered on sidewalks, eyes darting toward the man's house and then quickly away. The HOA board had called another urgent meeting. Karen knocked on his door with two members standing firmly at her side, her tone sharp and mocking as she said, "If you have nothing to hide, then bring your papers and show us what gives you the right to ignore the rules." The man looked at her for a long moment and then quietly opened the door wider. Without a word he gestured for them to come in. Hesitation flickered across their faces, but curiosity pulled them forward. The neighbors, always hungry for drama, followed behind until a small crowd stood just outside watching through the windows. Inside the man walked steadily through his hall, the walls lined with old photographs of the lake, maps in frames and shelves filled with dusty books. He led them to his study, a room filled with the smell of old paper and wood polish. In the center stood a heavy oak desk, its drawers locked with brass handles that had lost their shine over time. The man knelt calmly, pulled a key from his pocket, and opened the lowest drawer. He lifted out a thick leather folder bound with straps and placed it carefully on the desk. Karen crossed her arms, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is this?" "Some collection of fishing licenses." But when he opened the folder the smirk faded from her lips. Inside lay official documents yellowed with age yet preserved with care, signed by county officials decades earlier, notarized with seals that still gleamed faintly under the light. The man spread them out slowly, each paper filled with words that told a truth no one had ever considered. He tapped his finger lightly against the first page. "This," he said calmly, "is the deed that grants me ownership of this lake, not just the dock, not just the water near my home, but the entire body of water stretching from shore to shore." Silence filled the room. The neighbors pressed against the window gasped. The HOA members leaned closer in disbelief. The tall man grabbed one of the documents, scanning it with frantic eyes. The legal descriptions matched every inch of the lake, boundaries drawn clearly. His mouth opened but no words came out. The shorter woman shook her head, whispering, "No, this cannot be real." Karen snatched a page and read aloud, "Ownership of all water rights, shoreline access, and usage granted to the undersigned." Her voice faltered, her eyes wide. She looked up at him with a mixture of fear and rage. "You cannot expect us to believe this." But even as she spoke she knew it was true. The stamps were real, the signatures undeniable. These were no forgeries. They were the kind of documents that could stand unshaken in any court. The neighbors outside whispered, louder, the sound spreading like wildfire. "He owns the whole lake. Every drop of water belongs to him." Realization spread quickly, and with it fear, because the man they had mocked, threatened, and cornered now stood as the one person with complete control over what they cherished most. The man leaned against his desk, his arms folded loosely, his calm eyes scanning their shocked faces. "I told you," he said softly. "You do not understand who controls this lake. Now you do." The room grew heavier. With each second, Karen's hands trembled as she held the paper. Her face paled despite the anger burning in her chest. The tall man tried to regain his composure, stammering, "This does not mean you can ignore community rules." But even his voice lacked the confidence it once had. The truth was too strong. The foundation of their authority had cracked in one swift revelation. The neighbors outside no longer looked at him with suspicion but with awe and nervous respect. Whispers turned into hurried conversations. What would this mean for their fishing, their swimming, their parties on the water? Every privilege they enjoyed rested in the hands of the man they had tried to push down. The man gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into the folder, his every move slow and deliberate. Then he looked at them again, his voice steady and controlled. "I never wanted conflict, I wanted peace, but you forced your rules on me without knowing the truth. Now you must live with it." Karen's jaw tightened, her pride wounded, but deep in her chest fear coiled tighter than anger, because she finally understood that the battle she thought she controlled had already been lost before it began. Why the next morning the news had already spread across every corner of the neighborhood. People whispered on sidewalks, leaned over fences, and gathered in driveways, their voices low but urgent as they repeated the same shocking words. "He owns the whole lake." The rumor moved faster than fire, and by midday even, those who had not been at the study the night before knew the truth. Karen stormed through the neighborhood with her clipboard in hand, her face pale but her eyes burning. She tried to calm the panic, telling people that the HOA rules still mattered, that the man's papers meant nothing against the board's power. But her voice cracked under the weight of her own doubt, because deep inside she knew the truth was undeniable. The man stayed silent as always, his boat tied to the dock like it had been for years, but this time the silence worked differently. It was no longer a target of mockery. Now it was heavy with power. Every time neighbors passed his house they slowed down, their eyes drawn to the calm water stretching behind him. Whispers followed him wherever he went. "If he owns the lake, what will happen to us? Will he stop us from fishing? Will he block the swimming area? What about our parties?" Karen herself could barely sleep that night. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying his calm voice again and again. "You do not understand who controls this lake." The next evening a meeting was called. This time not in the hall but on the open lawn by the water. Dozens of neighbors gathered, their faces tense, some angry, some nervous, and at the center stood the man. Not because he demanded to be there but because everyone's eyes were on him. The tall HOA member tried to speak first, raising his voice loud enough for all to hear. "These papers are old. They do not change the rules of this community. We are still the board and the board has authority." But his words were weak. They did not carry the same sharpness as before. The crowd was restless. Some shook their heads, others muttered under their breath. Then one neighbor shouted, "If he owns the lake, then he can stop all of us." "What then?" Silence followed the outburst, the fear spreading quickly. The man finally spoke, his tone calm but steady. "I have no intention of taking away your enjoyment of the lake. I have lived here peacefully for years. I never stopped anyone from fishing or swimming. I never blocked your paths. But you tried to strip away my rights without even knowing the truth. Now you see who truly holds power here." The crowd murmured louder, some relieved, others still uneasy. Karen stepped forward, her fists clenched, her voice sharp though unsteady. "You cannot hold this over us. You cannot control everything." Her face turned red as she shouted. But the neighbors did not cheer her on like before. They looked at her with suspicion, because now they saw her as the one who had stirred conflict that could have cost them everything. The turning tables were clear. The man stood quietly, calm as ever, while Karen's authority slipped through her fingers. Every word she spoke made her look weaker. Every whisper among the crowd made him stronger. And when he looked back at the lake, golden with the reflection of the setting sun, it was clear to everyone that the balance of power had shifted forever. The HOA no longer frightened him. Instead it was they who looked frightened of him, their authority cracked, their pride broken, and their voices drowned by the calm silence of the man who owned the very water they tried to control. The night after the lawn meeting the neighborhood was filled with whispers. Some people felt relief that the man had promised not to take away the lake, but others still feared what might happen if he changed his mind. For the first time, the HOA members avoided walking proudly through the streets. Instead they hurried past with their heads low, and Karen, once the loudest voice, was now met with cold stares from neighbors who blamed her for pushing the fight too far. Yet deep inside everyone carried the same question. What would he do next? The man himself did not answer that question quickly. He spent his morning as always sitting on his dock with the lake stretching wide and silent before him. The sun rising slow across the water, his calmness only made the uncertainty heavier. By afternoon Karen gathered enough courage to knock on his door again. Though this time her voice was softer, almost trembling. "You cannot expect us to live under this shadow," she said. "The people need to know what you plan." Her words were loud enough for the small group of neighbors standing nearby to hear. The man looked at her for a long moment, then slowly stepped outside. The crowd grew as more people came out of their homes, drawn by the tension. Within minutes dozens stood waiting, their faces filled with both fear and hope. The man let his gaze sweep across them before speaking. His voice calm as always. "I could take away everything from you, the lake, the water, the shore. I could close it off tomorrow and no one could stop me." The words struck hard. Some gasped, others whispered nervously. Karen clenched her fists as if waiting for him to declare war. But then he continued, "I will not do that." His words carried a weight that silenced the crowd instantly. "I have lived here many years without taking anything from you. I have allowed your families to swim, to fish, to hold your parties, and I will continue to allow it. All I ask in return is that you respect my right to keep my boat where it belongs." The neighbors looked at each other in disbelief. Some sighed with relief. Some even smiled weakly. Karen's face twisted in anger, her pride shattered. She shouted, "You are making yourself king of this place, granting permission as if we live under you." But her words no longer carried strength, because the people no longer stood behind her. Instead they murmured softly, "Better to have peace than war. Better to accept than fight a battle already lost." The man's unexpected choice stunned them all. No revenge, no punishment, only a demand for respect. His calm generosity broke whatever authority the HOA once held, and as the crowd dispersed slowly, their fear replaced with a strange respect, Karen stood frozen, her voice lost, for she realized that her greatest enemy had won not by crushing them, but by sparing them, and that mercy wounded her pride more deeply than any defeat ever could. The days that followed felt different in the neighborhood. Where once the HOA members walked with authority, now they avoided the streets in silence. Where Karen's sharp voice once echoed through every corner, now people looked away from her with cold expressions. The power she had built for years vanished in a single week, broken not by shouting or fighting but by the calm silence of the man who owned the lake. Neighbors who once whispered against him now whispered about him with a kind of respect. Some even nodded politely when they passed, though their voices still trembled when they spoke his name. On the dock his boat remained tied as always, rocking gently with the water, a quiet reminder that no matter what the HOA demanded they could not move him. One morning, as the sun rose golden over the lake, the man sat again at the edge of the dock, sipping his coffee. The air was calm, the water smooth, but the neighborhood behind him was changed forever. The HOA had tried to flex their rules. They had tried to use fear, fines, and threats. Yet they discovered too late that real power did not come from papers or shouted words. It came from truth, from what could not be taken away. Karen tried one last time to stir rebellion, gathering a few of her closest allies on the lawn, her voice shaking as she shouted that rules still mattered, that the HOA could not allow one man to humiliate them. But the people no longer listened. Some turned their backs, others walked away. Her allies drifted off until she was left standing alone, her voice fading into the empty air. The man did not even step off his dock to face her. He did not need to. His silence spoke louder than her screams, and in that silence the neighbors understood a lesson that would never leave them. Sometimes the one who speaks least holds the greatest strength. Sometimes the one who does not fight still wins the battle. As the days stretched on, the lake became once again a place of peace. Children swam, families fished, parties echoed across the shore, and through it all the boat remained tied to the dock untouched, a quiet symbol of the truth no one dared challenge again. The man never bragged, never boasted. He simply lived as he always had, calm and steady, while the HO, once feared, shrank into the background. Powerless and forgotten, Karen's pride never healed, but her voice no longer carried weight. Her reign of control ended the moment the neighbors realized that rules meant nothing against the man who owned the water beneath their feet. And so the story closed on a morning much like the first, the man smiling softly as the sun painted the lake gold, his boat drifting gently in the calm water, and the neighborhood learning to live under a new kind of order, not one written in papers, but one written in silence, power, and truth.